As we think about the readings today, we have some very familiar readings. The one from the Gospel of John, our gospel text for today, comes much earlier in the gospel than that same account in the other gospels comes. But it's similar in its details, and it portrays an angry Jesus. It's not really our comfort zone, is it? We don't like the idea of an angry Jesus. We like the idea of a loving Jesus, a Jesus that is someone who cares for us even when we have been silly, even when we have hurt others. There's all kinds of images of God and embodied in Jesus with the lambs, with the children, and that's a more comfortable image for us, right? Not this idea of Jesus storming into the temple and thinking, I wish I had a weapon, it's okay, I'll just make one. And driving people out, kicking over tables. It's an uncomfortable image. But if we think about this as kind of a law and order situation, right? Jesus is upsetting the apple cart. The tradition was you could not use Roman money in the temple. And that one of the primary ways in which people maintained their relationship with God was through sacrifice at the temple. So you would arrive with your Roman money that you had to use everywhere, and then exchange it for temple money. So not unlike getting off the airplane in another country and thinking, oh, I need to get some local currency. And then there would be an area full of animals. And I picture people with iPads maybe walking around and asking you as you arrive as to why you were at the temple and what kind of sacrifice you might offer. Then identifying what animal you would need for that and pointing you to various stalls where there would be vendors there, the app store to assist you in procuring the right animal so that you could go further in and then offer that sacrifice with the help of a priest. There are historical economists, which is a thing, I guess, who have studied the temple operation in Jerusalem and determined it was the big economic engine of the entire city, the operation of the temple there. The idea that one's relationship, or that as a people, their relationship with God was maintained in such a directly, monetarily direct exchange. Jesus is saying your relationship with God is not a bill. Your relationship with God is direct. Let's get this garbage out of the way. Now that's kind of the not law and order. The law and order idea was you change your money here, buddy. And Jesus said, hey, look, buddy, that's not the way we're doing it today. The temple had their own police. Jesus was there with a big enough crowd that they were stuck to saying, sir, who said you could do this? We can imagine a very tense and angsty situation. Now, if we think of that event happening, and we put it up against the first reading, which hopefully sounds familiar, the 10 Commandments, although you won't find the numbers in there very easily, but they sound familiar, right? This idea of law and order, this idea of a list of things, or as we often in the Lutheran tradition will refer to the two tables of the 10 Commandments. The first being our relationship with God, and all of the others then being our relationship with one another. The laws are in place in this case to promote healthy human community and relationships between one another and between God and God's people. Not to punish, not to separate, not to distance, not to put down. That's what we see Jesus railing against. When we think of law and order, I can't help but think of this day in 1965, 5 years before I was born, which I know for some of you maybe makes it sound like a long time ago, but doesn't feel like all that long ago. There was a rather famous march, a march over a bridge from Selma to Montgomery. In fact, in the United States, that day is referred to in history 65 years ago 55 years ago, as Bloody Sunday. Bloody Sunday. It was a day when the black church gathered and marched over a bridge and were met by law enforcement. Now, we think rather famously of former Representative John Lewis there as a young man leading students who would eventually get his skull cracked hard in this event. But we also think of the other side. If we're thinking of law and order in this, I think it is worth taking a moment and talking about Sheriff Jim Clark, who was there, who was concerned about what was going to happen, and he was going to put a stop to it, people wanting to vote. Prior to the march, he sent out a notice to all white men over the age of 21, many from the Klan and others, to come to be deputized to stop this. What's interesting to me is that that sheriff had children that are perhaps not all that different in age from me. Raised in a home where the year before he died in 2007, he would do it all over again. 2007, like 14 years ago, I would do it all over again. Law and order used to separate, to put down. We can't help but think of that against the backdrop of all kinds of movements across the United States to tweak voting laws, to make it harder for certain communities to vote. Can't help but think of Bloody Sunday in relationship to the desire to stop Sunday voting in Georgia, which is very clearly targeted at the black community. As we think about how law and order, these 10 commandments even, have sometimes been misused and weaponized to create space, to hold people down, to enrich some at the expense of others. We think of the structures that we as human beings put up to separate people from one another and keep them in their place. Jesus in today's text is raging against this. Raging against this. He is not going to be stopped and saying, you are keeping people from God, and you are separating them from one another. Your law is unjust, and it stops now. As we move in these weeks towards Holy Week, today's text is a very important reminder. We hear the word zeal in the text. Jesus was zealous. We might even say a zealot for God's law in our hearts, for right relationships with those around us, the bringing together of humankind for everyone's benefit, not the enrichment of a few and the power in the fewest hands possible. Jesus said, times are going to change. Now you might be thinking to yourself in a couple of weeks, how does a nice guy like Jesus find himself executed by the state? Was it because his Bible studies were too good? Was it because there were too many people coming to his potlucks? Is it because his sermons were going viral? It's because he was seen as dangerous. He was seen as dangerous to the powers that wanted to keep certain people down and enrich a few. And because he was seen as dangerous, he was executed. Now, here we are, 2,000 years later, understanding that in the power of Jesus' anger and his love that is expressed in his death and resurrection, that new life has come. New life to our world and a vigor to us to continue that work of supporting our communities, our relationships, and the lives of all of those with whom we live, that they too might be made whole in God's image, and that we might not seek to hold them down. So think of all of those law and order connections today, and how God desires our health and wholeness in that, and how Jesus rails against those forces that intend to keep others down and poor. Amen.